Welcome to Stationery by Justine. I'm Justine. I am a wife, I am a kindergarten teacher, an Etsy seller, and a crafter. And this channel is meant to inspire you to create. If you like what you see, please go ahead and like the video and subscribe for future videos. I'm also a Spellbinders influencer, so all products from them are free to me, and the opinions that I state in my videos are my own. If you are interested in what I am showing, there are links in the description below this video, as well as a link to my Etsy shop. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made one of my stitch cards, and I'm going to finish off 3 of them that you see in the upper left-hand corner there. So I will be using the Stitched Thinks cutting dies from Spellbinders, and this is from April 2021. And I know that I'm a whole year late to this, but I have recently fallen in love with stitching on cards from this die and another one that will be in a video soon. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, I will just show you what I am doing with this card. I am splitting the embroidery thread from 6 to 3 strands, just because Spellbinders recommends using 2 to 3, and I found that 3 looks a little more fuller, so I use 3. And with this card, I'm going to be using 6 different colors, and that will kind of transition from this sky blue to this darker blue on the left, or the right, sorry. And each color will take up the place of one of the letters, so the THANKS. So you'll see how I do that as we go, but I just wanted to get my thread all ready to go before I started stitching. And I've made several stitched cards by now, but each one I kind of do a little differently. I typically use these needles, which are just needles that I had in my sewing kit that were labeled embroidery needles. I have a longer one and a shorter one, but I typically use kind of the longer one unless I'm hiding a tail at the end, and I'll show you how I do that. And sometimes I don't hide the tails and I use either this double-sided tape from a leftover kit, or I will use washi tape. It's kind of whatever's on hand. So if there's nothing to hide the end in, I will use tape like that. You can see on the back of these cards, that one I used washi tape and mostly hid the rest of the ends. On this rainbow one, I went crazy with the black and I hid a lot of the ends through and used 4 pieces of washi tape. And on this card, I used, I think, about 5 pieces there of the double-sided tape. So it kind of just depends on my card, depends on the colors. If I'm using a lot of one color, I can kind of weave it through. If I'm changing colors a lot, it just depends. So I'm going to start here, and I always start having the string go through and then into the middle. And then when the needle's in the back, I go to the edge and then back into the middle. So I do this process for most of the card, except for the stems, and I have 2 different ways that I do the stems. And it really depends on where I want my string to end up. If I want my string to end up right back at the same spot, I will use a stitch and then I will stitch all the way back, or I will use the stitch that you'll see here to go from this little flower to the big petal. So I'm sure there's a name for it, but I'm basically just back stitching. So I go forward and then back. Here's a close-up. And then I go to the next hole, and then I go back in that same one from before. That way it covers up that white area. And occasionally I do get little knots like you'll see here in a minute, but you just kind of work through it, and if it doesn't work, then you just cut it off. It's pretty simple, but usually I can kind of pick them out with my needle and move along. Anyway, so since this is going to be a card that has dark to light, I'm kind of wanting to keep that same color going. So I'm going to put this light blue on about 1.5 of those larger petals. So since my thread is near the top, I'm going to start at the top and go to the center and kind of work my way down and then finish the rest of the petal. This might be kind of unconventional, but it's just a way for me to save thread and to not have any threads in the back poking out where you can see it on the front, which I really try to not do. And I do have a very small knot right now in my thread, but I'm kind of hoping that at this point it ends up on the back, which it does. So if you can't get a knot out, it might just end up on the back and no one will ever know. And as I was saying before, I recently really started enjoying stitching by doing some of the other stitched dies that they have out right now. And I got one in a random acts of kindness letter that came from a Facebook group that I manage called Spellbinders Monthly Maker Group. So if you're interested in joining that and you're a Spellbinders enthusiast, go ahead and join the group. And we do a random act of kindness there where we send nice things randomly to different people. So I received a snowflake stitching die and I just started trying it and I loved the way it turned out and I liked doing it. I found it super relaxing. So that's where it all started. And if you were going to make this project or use any stitching dies, you basically take the die and you use some cardstock and die cut out the design, and that's really all the prep you need to do. So it's really nice to have a couple on hand. I found that I can stitch anywhere. You can stitch in a chair outside in the yard. You can stitch in the car on a road trip. Looks like I made a little mistake there, so we're going backwards. But you can stitch anywhere. And with summer coming up, I know that sometimes you're not always wanting to be in your craft room. So all you gotta have to do is make a couple die cuts, get your embroidery floss ready, and you're good to go. Now I'm at the end of where I want this color. So I basically just take my needle and thread it through the back. And sometimes I do a couple loops. This time I did 2, and then I just pull my needle and the thread pops right off. And then I'll take my scissors and just trim the extra. Since this is going on a card and it's not being used on a dish towel or anything, I really am not concerned about those ends really unraveling because it's going from my desk to getting glued with liquid glue onto a card. The chances of those threads popping out is really, really minimal. So I'm not too picky about hiding those ends that much. So I'm taking that same color now on the top and using a little bit of my double-sided tape to start the tail. And you could certainly leave it a little longer and then at the end make a knot or use a short needle and hide it at the end as well. But just for the sake of this video not being too terribly long, I use tape. Speaking of how long it took, this card I filmed, so I wanted it to be one take, if you will, and it took me 1 hour and 20 minutes to do all of the stitching on this card. And after it took about 15 minutes to die cut the letters and to glue the letters on, and then to glue this whole stitched die to the card and to make a card base. So in reality, it doesn't take too much longer than if you were going to stamp and die cut out some stamps and then use some colored pencils or Copic markers to color and shade. It doesn't take that much longer in my opinion, but I guess it just depends on how quick you are with your needle. But the more you practice, the faster it gets. And with a different stitched design, I've already made, I think, 10 cards with that. So I've practiced quite a bit, and like I said, it all started with that snowflake, which is really neat. And if it ever goes on clearance, I probably will buy that stitch snowflake and maybe make some Christmas cards, perhaps with some of the metallic embroidery floss, I think. Floss. I found that craft thread is not the same as embroidery thread. Embroidery floss. Craft thread is more of a fuzzy, I don't know if that's really the right term, but it just is really thick and bulky. And embroidery floss is more of a thin, flossy, silky type. So if you're going to use it, I would use embroidery floss. Now this is the second way that I do my stems. So you can see I'm going every other. And this is because I want my needle to end up back on the bottom. And then when I get to the top, then I go back and I stitch back down, going every other. Like so. And sometimes it doesn't hurt to flip it over every once in a while and just check the back to make sure that there's not like a giant knot or something got caught on some tape or another element of the back, just to make sure. And there we go, I'm back at the bottom. So the rest of this I'm going to speed up just a little bit until I get to that main flower kind of by my thumb. Since the die has many repeated patterns with the same flowers and leaves and stems, once you kind of know how you prefer to stitch certain areas, it can be quite a quick process. So this part of the video is sped up. I think I would be having a lot of coffee if I was stitching this fast, but it does go quickly once you know kind of the motions, if you will. So now I'm going to switch colors. And this is just a slightly lighter, kind of a teal color. And I'm going to go ahead and do the stem stitch all the way up. And use a little piece of tape to hide my tail. I guess it would be more securing the tail, but you kind of get the picture. I do want to mention that I use my Spellbinders, it's like a magnet gem that sits on my desk because I have lost needles switching colors before, so there's still one that I have not found. I have no idea where it is. I hope that I don't step on it accidentally, but I'm sure that might happen. Anyway, now since this is a card that has multiple colors, I basically am just blending it through. Part of the stem has a little bit of that light color, now this part has a different color, and that's just going to be how it's going to be. So on the rainbow card that I'll show at the end, you can kind of see that I used the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, but I didn't intermix the colors with the design. So if the flower was orange, the flower was all the way orange. But yeah. Now this part is where I make kind of a really annoying error. If you see there on that petal above the flower, I completely forgot to stitch it, and I did not realize it until I had already glued the whole thing on. So it was really annoying after stitching for a long time, but not to worry. What I did was I ended up using a marker and just pretending that it was a little stitch. So you can see that in the final photo, but yeah, it is what it is. Handmade, not Hallmark. I'm not that concerned about it. But just going back to the flower here, I go in and out, and I prefer when the needle is on the back, when it's on the edge, and to go through the center from the top, because using 3 threads, it does get a little crowded in that center area. But I found when the needle's going from the top down, it is a little easier. But it's not impossible to do it the other way either. So it's kind of whatever you're preferring at the time. So if you're interested in purchasing this specific die, it is not part of a current membership, but you can still purchase it, and I'll have a link in the description. So just so you know, if you use that link, it does help me out just a little bit. So I appreciate the purchase if you purchase it through the link. But if you already have it, I hope that this video is inspiring you to maybe pull it out after having it in your stash for a whole year and maybe make some more cards with it. But if you're saying, you know, maybe the thanks isn't your thing, but you'd like to try stitching, on the Spellbinders website, they do have quite a few different stitching dies. And one that I'd love to try out is the Stitch Kaleidoscope Strip Etched die, which is part of their Spring into Stitching from this year. And I love any time that they do the kaleidoscope on anything, really. I really enjoy it, and I love the stitching now, so I'd love to try that one out. If you're interested in watching a kaleidoscope video, I do have a video where I use the kaleidoscope flower, and that's on my channel. Another one that I'm interested in trying is the stitched petal frame, which fills the entire card, and that is the A2 size. And I think that that would be really neat to make, even just some basic stationery just to have on hand. And they also have a Merry Stitching, which was part of a large die of the month from November 2020. Oh, what a year. But that's where that snowflake is that I really started stitching with. And it comes with a snowflake and a Christmas tree and a border stitch, which is always neat because even though that's part of a Merry Stitching, which is like a Christmassy theme, you could definitely use that edge die on really any card. Then they also have a stitched medallion, which was part of their Spring into Stitching collection from this year. And they have a stitched flower, which has some petals, and a small flower, which I think would be really neat to make some really elegant small stitching. And they also have a sparkling mandala, I think that's what you say it, but it also looks like a snowflake to me. So maybe that's the same snowflake. No, it's different. No, it's different. So you could use that and the snowflake from the stitching die, but kind of have two of them on one. Also sell the Christmas tree just as it is, and they have a circular stitched background die, which would be really neat to make, again, full card background stitching. And they have a slimline strip, which would be really neat, and you could also use that on an A2 sized or a 5x7 card. Same with the diamond stitch. And on their website, they do sell needles from DMC. So you could go ahead and pick up needles from the Spellbinders page too. I mean, they're $1.39. It's really not that bad for needles. Although if you have needles at home, you can try to save some money, but you know. And one thing that they are out of stock on, which I hope to get one day, is the stitch card front border, which is similar to this design where it has those same flowers and the like little sprigs, but it has the center blank where you could go ahead and stamp really any sentiment in the inside, and it just looks so cheerful and adorable. and that was a large die of the month from May 2021. And at the time, I was not subscribed to the large die of the month, so I missed out on that. But it looks like they still have it on their website, so maybe when it's back in stock, I'll pick it up. We'll see. And I know that I've said it before about the Spellbinders dies, but I do want to just say it one more time. I love that they come ready to go. You don't have to snip them apart with wire clippers. You don't have to do anything but set them on the paper and send it through your die cutting machine, and you can start making right away, which is the best because when you have a die, you just want to use it. You don't want to sit there with the wire cutters and snip around, and like I've said before, it can be dangerous. I've cut myself one of those little wire pieces from another die company, cut my finger, and I was not happy about that because I work with kindergartners and I don't like any open wounds. So, not happening. But also with this Stitch Thanks die, those letters, the thanks letters, are free to be used with other things. You don't have to use them on this stitched element. So you could go ahead and take those off and use them on a card that just says thanks. You don't have to do the stitching. Or you could get creative with the letters and spell out something. So for example, you could spell out the word thank and then stamp a sentiment you. Or you could use some creative thoughts here. You could spell out the word task, and I'm not sure what that would be for a card, but maybe if you had like a little office theme card. I know some of the card kits have like notebook paper or pencils or something like that. So it could be like an office theme card. Or you could spell out Nana and make like a Mother's Day card for a grandmother. Or you could spell out tan or tans and make a summer theme card. Or, bear with me, you could spell out tank and perhaps make a little army tank for a veteran or a young boy birthday card. Or you could spell out the word ask and maybe have a stamp that said you, and maybe you would like to ask someone a question with a card. Or you could now this is a stretch. You could use the word shant, S-H-A-N-T, and I have no idea why that would go on a card, but you can spell it using the letters T-H-A-N-K-S. So that is all. Thank you for bearing with me for that weird journey we just went on. Now I will show you just one more little tip here. I used my scissors and just snipped that middle hole. And you can do that with the flowers as well, just to give yourself a little more area if you're using 3 strands, but you don't have to. And I found that you really don't need to use the snipping for this area, but I just wanted to show that on this video. Now I will put on a little bit of calming music and have that finish off the rest of the card, and I will jump back in when I am finished stitching the stitched part. if you're wondering who wrote that song, that was the Waltz of the Flowers from Tchaikovsky. So I feel like I'm on the radio say that. It sounds really silly, but there you go. I love his music. Plus, it's appropriate because there are flowers on the card. Again, reaching, but oh well. All right, here is the front of the finished stitch part. And yes, I know that I missed that part. We'll fix it in the end. And I did not realize it at this point, so I would have fixed it before I glued it on, but that's all right. All right, I'm going to use the little letters and use some scrap paper. You can kind of see I have it grouped by card. I'm using purple for the purple one, light pink, and blue for this one, and the rainbow one gets a rainbow. I'm using my Sizzix. Let me get the right name of it so I don't say the wrong name. Sizzix Sidekick. So it just sticks onto your desk, and it has 2 cutting plates and kind of gives my die cutting machine a break, the big one. Plus it's just so cute and little, and it works out really nicely. I haven't had it for that long, but I have used it quite a bit. And it was really convenient for making the flowers for the kaleidoscope card, because you had to run, each flower needed 3 pieces on top of the main die, and the little flowers each needed the flower in the center, so I definitely used that quite a bit. Now for my card base and the blue piece of paper, I cut that down to be 3.5 by 7, which is a little bit smaller than a large slimline card, which I believe is 3.5 by 8.5. So I just didn't want too much extra on the side, so it's just a little bit smaller than a large slimline, which is fine. I know that the mini slimlines are 3.25 by 6.25, so it's a little larger than the mini, but that's fine with me. I'll have to make some envelopes to go with these cards because I don't have any currently in my stash, but sometimes cards like this don't even need one because they're so pretty. So unless you're going to mail it, I guess you would need one, but if you're going to hand deliver it, it's kind of fun to have this beautiful design on the front. Now for adhering the letters and the stitched part, I'm going to use liquid glue. And the liquid glue that I'm using currently is Barely Art glue with the precision tip, which I find to be very helpful for gluing really anything onto my cards. And I'm using my reverse tweezers from EK Tools. And basically that just helps me to put the letters down straight-ish. Because I'm filming with my device up top, I can't really put my head over where the letters go, which is typically what I would do if I'm not filming, to see if it's centered. So it's helpful to use the reverse tweezers, and this way I don't get too much glue on my fingers. But I don't know, when you're crafting and you don't have glue and ink and marker and whatever else on your fingers, are you even crafting? I don't know. I guess if you're stitching, you maybe would get yourself with a needle. Hopefully there wouldn't be too much of a mess with that. Anyway, so to glue these letters on is basically the same for each one. So I'll speed that up. I did not film the process for die cutting and adhering on the rest of the letters for my other 3 cards, but you will be able to see the finished card for each of those at the end of the video. Now that all of my letters are on the card, I'm just going to kind of center it on just to make sure that yes, that's where it's going, and I'm going to load up the back with some liquid glue. And I'm going to focus on the white main areas, and with some other stitch cards that I've done in the past, I've left the stitch elements free. With this one, I did not put any glue on the back of the stitching, but you certainly can. It kind of depends on the look that you're going for. If you're going for a look where it kind of pops out a little bit more, I wouldn't glue them. But if you want it to be more of a flat finished result, you can go ahead and glue the stitched elements down right directly to the card base, like so. Then with a little bit of a press, it's finished finally. Yay! So if you enjoyed watching this video, please go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more videos similar to this. My videos typically aren't this long, but this one was a longer video since it had the stitching. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. And here is a look at all 4 of my cards. There's that blue one, the rainbow, the springy one, and the purple one. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!